Hello everyone, today it's July 7th, that's 2022, and on the same day 85 years ago, that was July 7th, that's 1937, occurred the incident of Lugochao Bridge, or the Marco Polo Bridge. Japan engaged a full military invasion on China, which lasted for 8 years, with Japan surrendered in 1945. When the Second World War ended. So today we talk about the clashes in Sino-Japanese history and the effect of Meiji Restoration and the 100-day reform. In history, in China and Japan have been long engaged and with several clashes. Now, from geology, China and Japan are neighbors divided by waters. But from national emotions, they are very far away. Over 2,000 years ago, and in the time of Qin Shi Huang, the legend said, forsaking the herbs of immortality, Xu Fu, and with 3,000 virgin boys and girls, sailed to the fair land of Penglai, and then arrived at Japan. The monk Jianzhen in Tang Dynasty had tried for 6 times to visit Japan, and finally promoted Buddhism there. Japan also sent many overseas students to China, and even today, and there were still over 800 Chinese characters in Japanese language, which reveals the influences of Chinese culture to Japan. And there have been 5 big wars in history between China and Japan. In August 663, the armies of the Tang Dynasty of China engaged war with Japan at Baijiangkou area in Korea and overwhelmed Japanese army with less troops. And since then, Japan began to learn from China willingly and never challenged China for the following 900 years. In 1274 and 1281, China's Yuan Dynasty tried to subdue Japan, yet failed, and due to the hurricanes. In the time of Wanli Emperor of Ming Dynasty, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a samurai in Japan, dominated in power and invaded Korea with 140,000 troops and hoped to take China, India, and even to relocate Japan's capital to Beijing. In 1592 and 1598, and China's Ming government and twice assisted Korea in defeating Japan. For the next 3 centuries, Japan kept peace with China. In 1894, the chaos in Korea ignited the Sino-Japanese War, and China's North Sea Fleet was destroyed, and Taiwan was ceded to Japan. In 1931, Japan occupied China's Manchuria. In 1937, Japan invaded further in China, and after 14 years of resistance, China won the anti-Japanese war and Japan surrendered in 1945. After the Second World War, an American scholar, Ruth Benedict, published a well-known book about Japan, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword, which analyzed the dual characters of Japanese personality and culture. It's a worship and obedience to the winner and authority, indifferent and ruthless to the loser and the weak. Follow the way of the warrior, disregarding the value of life. And with Fuji Mountain as the symbol of the nation, and Sakura as a national flower, that they hope to live as the gorgeous Sakura and to die like the quiet waters. In Japanese Meiji Restoration, the word Meiji originated from China's Book of Changes. The word restoration came from a Chinese book of poems. Meiji Restoration was a critical reform or revolution after Americans had forced Japan to open. Japan had been long in the loose status of autonomous states. Before Meiji Restoration, Japan had about 320 states. The emperor was just a paramount ruler in name, and the shogun, the general, controlled the real power. In July 1853, U.S. General Matthew Perry arrived at Japan with his warship and asking for an open door. In March 1854, Japan's Tokugawa Bakufu signed the Treaty of Kanagawa with America, to which many Japanese strongly opposed and asked for the restoration of the emperor's authority. And in 1867, the Emperor Komei passed away and Emperor Meiji succeeded to the throne. On April 6, 1868, Emperor Meiji began his new administration and with reform and policies like establishment of Congress for state issue and unity of the nation for development. The government and the people work together, replacing the outdated traditions with new fair play, learning from the world, and making Japan stronger. Japan removed the autonomous states with counties, strengthening the emperor's central power. It followed the Western monarchy constitution system that developed Japan's industry and our trade business. They built up new army and navy and established college and more schools for national education. Meanwhile, Japan assigned a delegation under Iwakura Tomomi to Europe and America for further research and seeking more foreign technicians. Japan also sent many overseas students to study. In April 1868, Fukuzawa Yukichi established his private school for national enlightenment, teaching his students to be practical and independent, and to learn from the West. Fukuzawa Yukichi became an influential educator, and his image was printed on Japan's 10,000 yuan paper bill. Besides, he also advocated for Japan to take over Korea and China for Asian predominance. In Meiji Restoration, there were three outstanding figures. They were Kido Takayoshi, Saigo Takamori, and Okubo Toshimichi. Kido Takayoshi put forward many suggestions to the reform and carried them out steadily, and he died of sickness at the age of 45. Saigo Takamori was one of the pioneers in Meiji Restoration, yet he involved in the rebellions against the central government at the late period of the Restoration and was killed in battlefield. Okubo Toshimichi organized the ministries in Meiji administration and was called the Bismarck in the East, and he was murdered by political opponents. Ito Hirobumi, one of the early members of Meiji Restoration and the first prime minister of Japanese cabinet. In February 1895, after the Sino-Japanese War, Li Hongdang went to Japan for negotiation, and they had a candid talk. Ito Hirobumi asked Li, "We had discussed China's reforms 10 years ago, why everything kept the same until today in China?" Li answered, "We have been limited to the tradition, so we failed. Until today, we realized we have to change for survival." Actually, since 1861, China set up the administration of foreign affairs and sent delegations to Europe and America. China established its own industries and enterprises and introduced railroad, ferry ships, telegrams, and banking systems. It had nothing made in political reform or changes in education or culture. After the failure of the Sino-Japanese War in April 1895, and during the period of imperial examination, that most of the Chinese scholars under the leadership of Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao jointly submitted a proposition to the government for reform. On June 11, 1898, Chinese Emperor Guangxu gave edict to reform nationwide for the purpose of getting China stronger. until September 21st, 1898, and there were about more than 100 reform instructions during the 103 days. Mainly about the establishment of the institution of great learning in capital and a new school system, a promotion of all trades and business, building up a new military and improvement in government administration. And the Guangxu Emperor especially held talks with Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao separately. It was said, at the late days of the reform, Tan Sitong went to see Yuan Shikai and proposed further reform or revolution with military coup. Yet this plan failed, and the key leaders of the reform were killed, and Emperor Guangxu was imprisoned by Empress Dowager Cixi. The 100-day reform failed. Kang and Liang escaped to Japan. Kang Youwei later became an absolute supporter for a monarchy system of imperial power, and Liang Qichao turned to support the new republic and devoted to China's new cultural movement, and for the first time, he put forward the notion of Chinese nation. The second Meiji Restoration prompted its military expansion. In 1874, Japan planned to invade Korea, Ryukyu, and Taiwan. And after Sino-Japanese War in 1895 and Russo-Japanese War in 1905, Japan became more ambitious. It planned to take over China and India to be the hegemon of Asia. During the Second World War, Japan's navy was destroyed by America, and the Soviet Red Army attacked Manchuria. Japan's homeland suffered from 2 atomic bombs, and it had to surrender by armistice. In 1972, when Nixon visited Beijing, and Japan also speeded up its diplomatic relations with China. During the negotiation, Japanese Prime Minister Tanaka Kakue said, in a post-war with China, Japan had brought much troubles to Chinese people, and Japan had to ponder it seriously. Yet he didn't apologize to Chinese government and people for Japan's war crimes and slaughters. As a saying, the past is the teacher for the present. If Japan refuses to repent upon its past jingoism, then clashes might occur between China and Japan due to Diaoyidao Island and Taiwan issue or American involvement. And it's hard to say whether or not China will one day bring somewhat troubles to Japan. The failure of a 100-day reform deprived of the last opportunity for Qing dynasty, and soon revolutions erupted now and then. In 1912, Republic of China came into being, and with the end of imperial system. Yet the following civil wars in China, especially Japan's invasion, that brought tremendous sufferings to China, and with casualties of over 30 million Chinese people. With Chiang's nationalist government withdrew to Taiwan, a new China was founded in 1949. In Europe, Britain, France, and Germany have been enemies in history and had wars and clashes for long. After the Second World War, they became the members in Western Bloc and NATO. Yet between China and Japan, some barriers are still there, and the emotions of hatred still smolder. Japan keeps on its worship in Yasukuni Shrine, the spirits of those Japanese who sacrificed themselves. And the yelling of revenge from Chinese people might erupt at any time. Yet during the pandemic of COVID-19, Japanese people provided assistance to Wuhan in China, which revealed the hope from the people for friendly engagements. Japan succeeded in Meiji Restoration, and it failed in military expansion. And China failed in 100-day reform, yet finally won the war against Japan. Concurrently, as the two big powers in Asia Pacific and in the world, and the bilateral relationship are very important for China and Japan. Thank you very much for today, and really appreciate your joining in, and see you next time.